Zosha, welcome to the show. I want to ask, first of all, about your instrument. I was asking if you were tired of talking about this, and you said never. And I was just saying how cool it is to be in music for 30 years. I have degrees, I've studied this stuff, and still, when we met, I was like, what's that? And why does it sound like that? It's incredible. Can you tell me about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm playing these days is called the Hardanger d'Amour. Um, and this is really related to the traditional Norwegian Hardanger fiddle. So what it is it looks, pretty much like a violin, and you have bowed strings, just like a violin or a fiddle. But you also have these sympathetic strings that run through the bridge, under the fingerboard, and sort of through the neck, this channel here. And you never bow them.
Oh, yeah, they're like
but
under the
yeah,
neck board.
yeah. So you're never bowing them, but they're activated sort of by the overtones of the instrument. And they're tuned to sort of whatever key you're going to be playing in. And yeah, it
These
gives it.
sympathetic strings are tuned to whatever key you're going to be playing.
Yeah, they're tuned sometimes like doubling the strings up here, sometimes just, reflecting the third or the seventh or whatever overtone you want to bring out in the sound. Traditionally, they'll, sort of be in a set tuning. Don't really shift very much, but when you, I'll just demonstrate really quick. It has basically a built-in reverb because of it. This like shimmer that
So real
gets
quick,
added.
if you're gonna record a different song for your album in a different key, you retune the sympathetic strings.
And the top strings, probably.
What?
Yeah,
Boy,
yeah.
I thought I had it rough as a saxophonist.
Yeah, and so instead of like tuning multiple times on stage for a show to go through different keys, most people who play in this instrument will just have multiple fiddles because you can't really retune. The
Okay.
instrument isn't happy. So it's like either have multiple fiddles or stay in one key center for a while. But
Yeah.
it adds this sort of
Right.
transience, like this reverb that's in between.
And you
That's
have
all the
no
sympathetic strings.
control over those sympathetic strings after they just ring.
They just ring, but if you play a note that they're not tuned to, you won't hear them. They're not going to respond unless it's
That's
connected.
wild.
Yeah,
That's really
that's really
fascinating.
cool.
And we were talking a little bit before we started here about intimacy and the way Americans like 3 minute songs with lasers and smoke machines. I like that stuff too. I'm not sitting on it, but like, and you were talking about how tuning when you go to Norway, when you were in Norway, was a big part of kind of the performance. It's expected, and people are a little more patient with it, etc.
Yeah, well, there's so many strings. Like on
Right.
a traditional Hardanger fiddle, you have 8 or 9 strings that need to be tuned. And it's expected that they're going to be in tune too. So I think there's just,
Okay, so also they have a
yeah,
scrutiny for it.
yeah, no, people
Okay.
know. People know when it's not in tune.
Wow.
And the sound of the fiddle changes. So, every show that I've been to or every performance or even sort of like if there's a social dance and there's a fiddler playing for a dance before the tune starts, you have to check the tuning and you have to check all of the different strings. And I found that there was just this beautiful audience patience, and whereas in the US, I always think about like in the like bluegrass worlds, you have your
Okay.
mandolins and your banjos that spend probably the most time tuning on stage.
Yeah, I'm
And
usually
there's
annoyed by that. When
yeah.
I.
Well, and there's always a joke about it. There's
Right.
always something about tuning a mandolin or tuning a banjo, and there's this it's trying to distill the awkwardness a little bit, just make it less awkward by making everyone laugh. But I really don't think that's necessary after going to this place where the tradition, requires this very, very precise tuning. So for me, it's kind of turned into this. I get on stage, I check the tuning, and it's a moment of collecting myself too before I start
Yeah, we were
playing.
talking about
Yeah.
how I was saying that some years ago I switched up. I actually developed a practice routine, and instead of just winging it every time I walked into practice, but the first 45 minutes I play long tones. And not only is that good for my sound, my reed, my embouchure, and all of that, but it's kind of a zen sort of, it puts me in the same mentality every time. So that maybe if I'm in a different psychology one day, it'll get me back a little bit more to the area that I might be able to learn that day too, instead of just a blown day. But let's get this out of the way. You're playing free improvisation music. This isn't, you're not just a traditional folk Norwegian musician.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're playing contemporary, never been done before. People might want to use experimental. I'm just interested in the thought of that, of how, I want to be this contemporary free jazz, whatever you want to call it, musician, but I love this instrument and it feels like my voice. So I'm going to go to Norway and study with these traditional folk musicians. That's interesting to me,
Yeah. I think the thought process behind all of that, at the time, I guess I was like really inspired by different music from around the world, like different traditions, different modal traditions, especially. And I was dabbling in things, trying things out, trying to learn. Like I was learning a bit of Arabic music for a while, and a little bit of klezmer, and a little bit of this and that. Things that are really rooted in different traditions and cultures.
We're similar in that way.
Yeah, and I was starting to feel a little bit guilty. I was like, "Am I appropriating? Am I like supposed to be in these spaces?"
Yeah.
And I had a lot of debate with myself about this, about like what I had permission to do and what I had to do in order to enter these circles and pay respect to tradition. Like, what is the line, and am I crossing it in any way? So I think at that time was also around the time that I had gotten this fiddle, and I was just like, this is no different than me picking up a violin and trying to play Arabic music. Like, it's no different for me to be taking this other tradition and taking some little bits and pieces from it and putting it in my own stuff. It's still something that I don't really have a connection to in my heritage. You can argue that I have a connection to it through like Minnesota and Scandinavian culture. But I just needed to get deeper. And also, people who are using this instrument, just from a practical standpoint, most of them are in Norway. So when you're really learning the mechanics of the instrument and learning like what it can do, a lot of people are there.
Yeah, we had Jake Charkey on the show. He's a cellist and he plays Indian classical music, but he does his own thing with it too. And I said, "Do you think you need to go there?" He said, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
He's like, "Yes, you can study from somebody from there here, and that's great. But there's something in the water, there's something in the food, there's something in the culture. You're gonna miss out on a lot of that stuff if you don't go there.
Yeah.
Did you have an overview of where you wanted to end up and what things might, or was it just a path that you followed? Okay, now the light is in this direction. Now the light is in this direction.
It was sort of like that. It was sort of more of a, okay, what's next? And it was the sense of, getting to the end of my undergrad, I still felt like, okay, my musical voice isn't completely formed yet, and I need to dig deeper. Like, I'm not ready to write an album or do these things. Like, I'm not really finding my place in music. So I needed to push deeper into something. And this was just the thing that seemed to be calling to me the most.
I studied from Charlie Hayden, and he said it used to be that I would pick up my instrument and I would be confused. How do I do what I'm hearing or what I feel like I should do? And life was the part that I felt okay with. And he's like, and then for the second half of my life, when I had my instrument, everything was fine and made sense. It's when I put it down that it got kind of confusing. So that's kind of a big kind of turning point, I think, for I would like to think that young people might hear that and say, okay, it's all right to admit that I'm not ready for something yet, because a lot of people are like, okay, just got out of school, time to make an album and then maybe make another one. Let's book a tour and maybe. I knew a guy at 19 who was like that, and then I knew other people that it took them a lot longer. So
yeah, I think like everyone comes to it at a different point. I remember getting to the end of college and being like, okay, by the time I'm 26, I want an album. Like, that's my cutoff. And that didn't happen. Like, I wasn't ready. Like, looking back, I really wasn't ready for that moment musically in feeling to myself. And going back to what you were saying about, like, was there this overarching, like, this path that I wanted to follow? I went to Norway with the idea of, like, I'm going to be there 1 year. You know, I applied for a Fulbright. I got some funding to go over there.
You did get a Fulbright,
I did
right?
get the Fulbright, yeah. So I went over as a student and just was going to be doing a 1 year program, learn a bunch of folk music. And in my whole proposal, I'm like, okay, I'm going to compose, like, a body of work for this instrument. I'm going to compose a song cycle. Like, that was the end product. And what actually happened was that I got there and I'm like, oh, wow, I need more time. Like, there's something here that I need to dig into. I'm going to stay an extra year. I'm going to keep on playing and try to, like, find where my voice is. And at the end, like, even just halfway through, I was a completely different musician, like a completely different player. And my ideas of, you know, what it meant to be a composer too had shifted so drastically.
Because you learned some new scales and licks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that it?
No,
Because you can learn them here. There's the internet, right?
There's the internet.
Yeah.
I
like,
think
what do you mean? What was the...
I think there was something about letting go, really, and letting go of control, just, like, letting myself be a beginner again, and just be like, you know, in my studies, I had several different amazing fiddle teachers when I was in Norway. And I was such a beginner on this, like, Hardanger fiddle. I wasn't playing this instrument here. I was playing, like, a traditional Hardanger fiddle, which has different sized neck, different strings and tension, a flatter bridge. Like, I was scratching away at it for a while. And I was just face to face with teachers. They would be playing a phrase. I'd play it back at them. They'd start, like, looping these tunes. I had no idea what the rhythms were. Couldn't really, like, wrap my head around these different embellishments and intonation. There's this whole, like, method of foot tapping that you're supposed to do with the music because it's connected to a dance tradition. So you're playing dance tunes. I was dancing. I was learning how to do all the traditional dances. And I was just such a beginner, trying to learn these tunes and cycling these different phrases and feelings in my hands and, like, being a really bad dancer and suddenly a pretty good dancer. There was a shift just in my body and in my hands where I picked up my fiddle and I started playing, like, started improvising.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was completely different. Something clicked that it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain it to myself, I think.
Did you talk to your teachers and peers about this idea that I kind of want to take this and do my own thing with it, contemporary stuff? Were you like, hey, I'm learning this to not be, because I studied the Persian ney for a little while from a guy from Iran, and I said, yeah, I'll take lessons from you. Incredible musician. I mean, my knees shake whenever I hear him play. It's like the breath of God coming out of this instrument. And I'm like, can I just bring my saxophone in and you teach me the melodies or whatever you would teach me? I'm yours, whatever you want. But can I just bring my horn in and, quarter tones, the modes, the rhythms, the melodies, and even the timbre to some extent? And he said, no, you got to get a ney. And I said, but I don't want to be a ney player. I want to learn it. And he said, that's fine, but you're going to take the ney and you're going to learn it. And then you can do whatever you want with it afterwards. And then there was a day where he said, okay, it's time to, because the ney you shove in between your front two teeth. And he said, it's time, you need a space. Like I was using X-ray film as the mouthpiece because it would fit in between my teeth. He said, you need to go to the dentist and get them to drill a slit in between your teeth. And I said, yeah, man, I'm not going to do that. He said, but your sound is coming along. I was like, I'm not going to be a ney player. And so I talked to him. We were studying Ewe music from a guy from Ghana. There was people doing North Indian music there at that school. I took Javanese gamelan. I was playing with an Armenian singer and pianist. And all of them, I was like, and this was a little bit before the misappropriation conversation started happening. And I was like, I want to I like the idea of, I'm just studying melodies, harmonies, and rhythms. I'm studying music, but I don't want to like shit on your music. And they were like, that's fine. People have done that from this school. They've taken this stuff. Just be respectful. Make sure you know what you're actually studying. Don't bastardize it. Don't get it wrong. but yes, you can do that. So I feel like I got permission a little bit, and
Yeah.
then the conversations of recent years came out about, misappropriation and all of that. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it settled back onto what they were saying too. So
Mm-hmm.
did you ask these people, were you like, look, how far can I take this without it being, I'm not really trying to talk about offensiveness, more about like, how to do it, how to understand it in a different way.
Yeah, I would have some conversations here and there with some of my teachers about, you know, am I doing this the right way? And I think for myself, I laid some pretty firm boundaries from the beginning of like, I wasn't trying to compose a tune in this rhythm that's like a traditional rhythm. Like, I wasn't trying to do that at all because I wasn't really interested in that in a
Yeah.
way. And everyone I talked to, they were all like, "Why are you here? Like, why are you interested in this music?" And I would just express to everyone like, "I want to get deeper into this. Like, I'm really curious about the instrument."
Right.
And I think looking back, I was talking to one of my mentors sort of after this whole development happened, and she's like, "Yeah, I was watching you this whole time, and you've been incubating like these ideas and these things that you've been learning, and you've been struggling. You've been like really starting from the beginning and internalizing it, and I knew that you just had to be patient, and I wasn't going to tell you this while it was happening because you needed to go through the process." And I think that was just like the biggest thing for me. I don't know if anyone really gave me permission, but a few key people just knew that something was brewing, something was simmering like under the surface, that was soon going to kind of emerge in what happened for me. I don't know if that answers the
It
question
does.
really.
It's. I think the answer is
Yeah.
is you. So whatever
Yeah.
your truth is kind of I think what people would want to hear. Yeah, I feel like if I want to be progressive, if I want to be experimental, or even just progress as a musician, but especially if I want to be contemporary, I have to have some kind of connection to a tradition. So a
Mm-hmm.
friend of mine asked me recently, "Do you think kids going into college to study music who know they want to be, compose music that is 21st century. They don't want to compose Bach. They don't want to write
Mm-hmm.
music that is tonal. Should they have to study tonal harmony and like,
Mm-hmm.
five of five chords and like, how to change keys and all of this voice leading that comes from Bach?" And I said, yes, because it gives you subject rather than object. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
just say, here's some sonorities and here's some orchestrative, like how you would voice some of these sonorities, then it becomes just objects you can put together, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
But being forced to study, like, for example, four-part counterpoint writing
Mm-hmm.
gives you sort of a more of a through subject oriented way of writing
Yeah.
rather than just thinking, oh, I can do anything. I just feel like if I'm not connected to some tradition, the blues or jazz or,
Mm-hmm.
Persian music, or then I can't really progress and I can't really be experimental. Do you
Right.
feel that, like that's important, or just maybe just important for you?
I think it's important for me. I think that yeah, it's probably just so dependent on the person too,
Right.
and I think that studying a tradition of any sort, if a composer is coming at it and they want to be really progressive, like what does progressive mean?
Right.
And I think that's where it comes back to this, whether or not they're studying Western classical music theory or maybe a tradition from a different part of the world, any sort of music, or maybe not music. Maybe they're studying film or visual art or other things that instruct us about form and density and like
Absolutely.
using objects. There, it's important to be informed by
Yeah.
history, I think, because you can't make anything in the present without drawing upon what's come before.
Right.
There is no present without you know
Right.
referring to our past, and everything that comes at us now, there's such a depth of meaning. Like, everything is referring to something.
Right.
We don't live in a vacuum. So as much as we try to avoid referencing something else, it's all of our lived experience. Like, we can't actually get away from any of it. So I think it's really valuable to study whatever tradition you want. I'm definitely not of the attitude that everyone should be studying classical music, Western classical music theory. But I think
Nor am
there's,
I.
yeah. I think there's something about giving up sort of the control for me was really important. Of like, I'm just going to be a student of this process and see what happens. And yeah, I wasn't really strict about like, okay, now I'm going to compose something in this form. Right. I was just like, I'm going to learn this as well as I can, and I'm going to mimic this as well as I can, and like really immerse myself. I'm going to dance. I'm going to learn the micro rhythms in these weird meters.
By the way, you've mentioned that a couple times. It's great. It's healthier that other cultures are like, well, you have to learn to dance too.
Yeah.
Like I find that to be nearly universal. Yeah. And rather than, maybe we don't do that here, you know what I mean? But like, that's so connected to it because that's what it was. Do you ever get jealous of people, because I went like this in the study. Sounds like you kind of did a little bit of that too. And I kind of bounce around. But do you ever get jealous of people who said, okay, this is it. I'm going to be a rock guitarist and I'm going to study rock guitar music. It's a straight, one goal at the end of this straight path.
I mean, I really admire that a lot to know exactly like what you want to do, and the people who have that drive and focus to just see it through to the very end. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I've just been way more like indecisive about everything. So it's like, oh, I'm interested in this. And then my brain jumps to another thing and jumps to another thing.
But as an overall, don't you find that makes you, I don't want to say better overall musician, but that maybe you've learned some depth that, I always think about I play tenor saxophone, guys that, they study this area of Coltrane's music for their whole life. That's what they do. And I'm like, okay, but he wasn't just studying that. So, you know what I mean? Like, and that's an exaggerated extreme version of it. But I don't know. I wouldn't, it's hard. It's hard to juggle these things, but I wouldn't go back and like just go in one direction and say, that's what I'm going to do.
No, I'm really happy that I did spread out in the way that I did too, because it gives me a wider context to all of my music, and it gives me versatility. And I think it lets me be a lot more malleable, like in the moment, and be able to collaborate with so many different types of musicians. So I'm really I'm glad, and I think it's also for me exploring so many different things. It makes me feel like now as a musician, like this is who I am. And it's influenced by all these experiences, and it's the right place to be. It's not like I made the wrong choice by like picking one thing at the beginning of my career and going through, and now I'm at the end and I'm like, oh, but what if I did that other thing?
Right. Yeah.
I still think about that here and there, but with so much exploration, it feels like, I don't know, it's all woven together in something that feels really authentic.
Speaking of which, you have an album coming out.
I do.
Can we talk about the album? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you
pointed
it at it here. This is my first album.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be putting it out.
It's your first album.
It's my first album ever.
Great.
So it's a long time coming, in a way.
It looks hip.
Thank you.
To begin with, it looks super cool. So
yeah. I'm pretty proud of this. So it's coming out May 3rd, Relative Pitch Records, a really great experimental avant-garde label in New York run by Kevin Riley. And it's basically just a snapshot of who I am as an improviser right now, or, last June when I recorded it. I went into the studio for a couple of days up at Spillway Sound near the Ashokan Reservoir worked with Eli Cruz.
Real quick, it's a solo. Okay.
Yeah, solo fiddle record, and pretty meditative and
Yeah, no, that's what I
pretty
felt
repetitive.
when I heard you. It was drawn in and complete, like lost track of time and
Yeah.
space. You know.
Thank you.
Which is, no, that's the best thing you can ever do for someone. I think that's when people feel the best, is when they come out of something saying, "Wow, that a lot happened, but it flew by." You know, that sense of cognitive flow or whatever they call it.
And that's totally the goal for me. Of if I can give this continuous performance that allows people to lose track of time and to not notice that it's been a half an hour, 40 minutes, or to not notice that something that's been cycling and repeating has also been slowly morphing, where the time has been morphing or the tonality has been morphing. That's really the ultimate goal for me. I had a weird like identity crisis about this a few years ago. I was like, well, I'm not a composer because I don't write anything down and I'm like improvising my performances. But I'm not an improviser because I keep on repeating these things. And so it's not totally free. And then I decided it didn't matter.
No, it
and,
doesn't matter.
you know, it totally doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But
in fact, if you don't know what to call it,
it's better.
Probably the better, you know?
Yeah.
A friend of mine told me that I was trying to explain to him a chord that I had written, like a chord symbol, you know, like minor, major. And I said, I don't really know what this is. And I showed him on the piano and he was like, well, if you don't know what it is, you're on the right track.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely identify with that statement. So I do have a tendency to return to these different spaces that I've found through exploring the instrument, through learning different tunes, through just like experimenting. And I've been kind of thinking about it as like you have one landscape or one scene. And every time you return to the scene, it's like coming at it from a different angle. You have a different camera shot, or you're zooming in on one part. Like if we're looking at this living room, like this time I'm going to focus just on this border of the lamp. But another time I might focus on the wall behind. Or
but when you go into playing that, you know that's the scene I'm going into right now.
Sort of. When I start playing around a certain thing, it often will bring me back to that place that I've been before. I'm like, okay, I recognize this. I'm going to dig into this, you know, in a way that I'm familiar, but then kind of let go of the control and let it go whatever direction it needs to go in that moment. Or maybe there'll be starting points too. Like I'll have a texture that I start with that I've explored before, and this time we'll see where it goes. Or this time I know that I want to turn the page into this other scene. So what is really fun and interesting in the moment is how am I going to get there, and try to sketch that out while performing.
That's so inspiring and healthy and reminds me to, you know, go about it that way and to let go of control. And I just love the overall theme of that. So, all right. I think thanks for talking to me today. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah.